I'm just testing my mic. Is it working okay? Can you guys hear me there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I can hear you too.
I bring today's Assembly Committee of the whole meeting to order. Miss Atkinson, will you do the land acknowledgement?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Ganashish.
Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Ms. Hendricks, will you note the roll?
Thank you. The roll is noted. We have Madam Mayor on Zoom. And Deputy Mayor Smith is absent. All other members are present and you have quorum.
Thank you. That brings us to approval of agenda. Any changes to our agenda? Seeing none, that is so moved. That brings us to approval of minutes. You have the August 4th Assembly Committee of the whole minutes. Any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, those are so moved. That brings us to agenda topics. Topic number 1, process for flood mitigation next steps. Manager Kester.
Thank you, Chair Wool. I am going to kind of talk through this memo a little bit and add some context. Would you like to stop me when an assembly member has an additional, not necessarily a question because this is a process memo, but I need this information about that particular topic? Okay. So please feel free.
Yes, if people have ideas, raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Thank you. So the purpose of this process memo is to really help you get your brains wrapped around and the public's brains wrapped around some of the decisions that will need to be made in advance of the 2026 GLOF season. So I'm not asking you to make decisions today, mostly because I don't have all the information that you need to make that decision, costs of different things, timelines, etc. But it is complicated enough that it's worth you putting some thought into those different tension points and asking for what you need as a member to help you either from a process perspective with more information or from a facts and data perspective. So that's where, if you're like, hey, I need this other piece, I might not be able to answer it, but then I can flag it and we can get you that information. So I want to talk a little bit, for starters, about the Phase 1 LID, right? That was a heavy lift. We completed that project, but we haven't put a bow on it. And putting a bow on the LID is confirming the assessment role. And that is the opportunity that affected property owners have to come to and say, hey, my property should be exempted because of X, Y, or Z reason. So you still have an opportunity to exempt certain properties. You also have an opportunity to adjust the amount of that LID payment. It just can't be more than $6,300, which was the noticed number from the projected budget that we had. We did come in under budget, and we did, at this moment, we are under budget. There are certainly some expenses that aren't included, mostly because we haven't finished the lawsuit that is currently pending. But you also received some grant funding for that. Glicket and Haida was able to bring $880,000 to the table for that project. DEC was able to give us a 50% forgivable loan for that project, only for the construction elements of that project. So, not every element of the project would be eligible for that forgiveness, but there's the potential of, millions of dollars that you have already appropriated to that project that could either offset general fund that's been appropriated, right, as part of that 60-40 split with property owners, or offset the assessment cost for those property owners, or some combination. And when I talk about offsetting general fund, I think it's important to not think of that in the context of like growing your fund balance, but to think of that in the context of future stages of flood mitigation, whether it be phase 2 or a long-term solution, or repairing the HESCO barriers, or staffing up an annual all hands on deck emergency preparedness response, right? So there's a lot of expenditures with being like flood ready that we've been experiencing. So, it's kind of balancing. Those are just things that you're going to have to balance as you think about certification of that final assessment role. I think another thing that you're going to have to think about when you, certify it is, do you want to, not certify it and do a larger LID? And what are the pros and cons of that? Do you want to do a special tax district? And what are the pros and cons of that? And we talk about that a little bit in the memo, but, it can quickly get really complicated. And I do intend on bringing you a recommendation on what is kind of like the least complicated, the most fair. But any guidance you can give me on what your, guiding principles are on that would be useful. Reoccurring costs are another component of flood mitigation. So we don't know the total project cost for ongoing maintenance, but there was definitely damage to the barriers. There's damage to the armoring. We're going to need to have an account code, right, to code all of our emergency response to. I mean, we do have an account code, I should say. We're going to need to have a funding source to fund the account code. That's probably more important than the account code. We probably need to look at a staffing model where there is some year-round engineering staff, maybe not a full staff person, but maybe 50% of an FTE that can be really dedicated towards all things flood, because it's not just repairing the HESCO barriers. It's phase 2. It's a long-term solution. It's participating with the Army Corps in what that long-term solution looks like, et cetera. So those are just things that, you should be thinking about when you're like, how do we pay for flood, all things flood?
Before we move on to talk a little bit about phase 2 here, any questions from the assembly or immediate information needs that jump out to you that you want to highlight? I've got, Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My internet's a little bit spotty, so hope I'm coming in clear. I'm south with my mom for a little procedure for her. But anyway, it has to do with View Drive and could part of phase 2. I know we can't put HESCO barriers around View Drive, but can we put them around individual houses?
Mayor Weldon, we're gonna, just break up this conversation a little bit. Right now, we're just talking about phase one, and then Manager Kester is going to give us a bit more information on View Drive and phase two.
Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. Like I said, you're in and out a little bit.
No worries. I've got a quick question on the phase one stuff. I feel like I had thought we, as part of the lid, built in maintenance costs or some amount of that, or, if we came under budget in construction, and we need to beef up what we did there. Is there a way to include some of those costs that we didn't know, we know more about now within the lid, given that we came under construction budget?
So the first part of your question is, I thought we put some funding away for maintenance. You put $500,000 into a fund to restore property. So like if we had to remove a deck, if we had to do something like that, we would create a grant program in the future to restore that property. You did not include any maintenance, and the city attorney has said that LIDs are a mechanism for capital projects, not for maintenance. So that would not be an eligible expense for the lid.
Even if we're like beefing up, adding additional HESCOs on top, or, I don't know the difference between capital and maintenance, maybe in that kind of context.
That's correct. So even any changes that we're making going forward are going to be new and different costs and new and different expenditures that are not subject to the lid. The lid is exactly what we did, and that's it.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you. Then I just want to clarify, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but, if we then close out the LID and it is under budget, that extra could be used to do maintenance if it's city money. Is that correct?
That's correct. If it's city money, that's right.
All right, let's talk phase two.
Thank you. So one of the challenges with phase two is it's much more expensive. And most of that is because of armoring. I have a $19 million rough order of magnitude. Last week it was 17 million. Reality is we have not spent the time that we need to get you even better ballpark number, and that is an absolute number that you are going to need before you make any decisions. So that is why this is a process memo and not a how much do you want to spend? So I think that some of the things that you're going to need to think about are that return on investment. And we talked about it a little bit when we went through 1A and 1B, right? Okay, if we build to a 20-foot inundation level, how likely is that 20-foot? Is it really worth building to that level? Should we be trying to protect 80% of the property, 80% of the time? How do we make an assessment of what 80% of the time is? And that will be informed, of course, by science, but in the end, it's a risk analysis that you will be asked to make. So I think that's just a really important thing to flag, because in the end, it will be unsatisfying, just like many of the phase one decisions were, you didn't have enough information, right, you had to make a decision with incomplete information. It will again feel that way, and we're trying to get as close as we can to an analysis. And you'll see there's a map as an attachment that's just a kind of, crayon along the river, HESCO barriers. And there's a lot of commercial property that's also protected once you get at those higher stages. You also may have property owners who are less willing to participate if they make their own personal risk assessment that, it's never going to get this high, so why should I contribute to an effort? So again, those are all struggles that you are unfortunately very familiar with. Also think we need to think about armoring in places where there is no armoring or limited armoring, or where there would be benefit from armoring. And of course, I think in phase one, it was relatively easy. We didn't have any objections from the 4 property owners that required additional armoring. It was a great deal for them. Will the property owners this time around feel the same way? Will we have to be making more like value judgments of like, well, this does help you, but it doesn't, but how much does it help you? How do we want to like require compensation for that? And again, you're going to need a better analysis of like what that riverbank looks like. I think number 3 here, what inundation map we should build to is really covered by how much of phase 2 HESCO should be installed. But there's also part of like height of HESCO barriers. Like, do we build them for 18 feet, for 20 feet, and not just how long we build them, but also how high we build them? Do we want to do a phase 2 LID? A challenge with phase 2 is you've got a lot of commercial properties. So you can't necessarily use the same assessment methodology because you have just a far fewer volume of properties, but maybe far greater value of property protected, right? So that speaks to a different assessment methodology if you did want to do a second LID. So those are just things that you'd want to think about. And what would be helpful as you kind of cogitate on this is what you feel like is fair from a per household perspective for CBJ taxpayer contribution versus CBJ versus individual homeowner contribution, right? There's like that balance here. I think I state in the memo, if we want homeowners to pay roughly the same amount that they did in phase 1, that's going to be it's going to require a different assessment methodology. And of course, there's the special tax district, which would be an entirely different methodology that I talk about below. We also don't really know what outside funding we can get for phase 2. Congressman Begich has secured $3.2 million. It hasn't passed Congress yet, but he's fairly confident that will go towards phase 2. We've also heard from DEC that the 50% forgivable loan is on their list of eligible projects, so they're at least advancing that to keep it under consideration. Again, don't have that in hand necessarily. I've also been working with Army Corps of Engineers and really pushing them on like, could you pay for armoring as part of advanced measures like HESCO barriers, giving us HESCO barriers, giving us technical assistance on HESCO barriers. What about actual armoring? And so they're kind of just digging into that question again, if like public light 499 or allows that. And so if that were the case, right, that would change the project costs. All questions that you need to have answered before you can make that decision on phase 2. So I will pause here before I move on to view drive and buyouts.
Ms. Hughes Gandy's.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is all great, thank you. I think for this one, as we get more of those details, the more information we can have about what that other assessment methodology would look like, how different a potential same approach out-of-pocket cost would look compared to phase 1. And as much information as we can get about the breakdown between this is a homeowner on residential property versus, like what percentage, I think would be helpful to me because the methodology for breaking down the cost of phase 2, I think is going to be just as hard as the return on investment. So as much information as we can get on that front would be helpful to me.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask my first question, but I have a different question. And this is actually more for the attorney to do some homework for her. When we go to assess property or trying to figure out a way to pay for phase 2, can we do something different between residential and commercial? And the reason I'm asking is I'm assuming commercial is much more value, has much more value than the residence.
Thank you for the question. I am going to have to research that more and I will get back to you on that.
Ms. Hall.
I'm just curious, is phase 1B now part of phase 2? I don't see that referenced in.
I believe Phase 1B is part of Phase 2, if you see with the blue line that goes around that little oxbow. And that is, I think, why I have a $2 million jump in a project that I thought was always 17 million is 19 million. So yes, 1B would be the very next thing that we would recommend doing.
Other questions or information needs? I've got one on this, and we did a bit of this during phase 1, but maybe this is just kind of a different way to describe this information to us and to the community. You know, I heard when we talk about bigger and bigger floods, this idea that we're, you know, talking about double the amount of water between, I'm going to make something up, 18 and 19 feet. Some way for us to kind of really visualize, you know, I think people like me will kind of assume that if we went from 15 to 16, that it's going to be easy for us to go from 16 to 17, and having some sense of really how likely those bigger and bigger, I know we think it's probably going to get bigger and bigger, but the volume of water I think will be helpful for me to really, I don't know, visualize or understand, you know, how likely it is to get bigger and bigger, knowing we don't know, but to, you know, visually see that. And similar, the questions of, you know, if we have an atmospheric river and it's high tide, you know, some ways that we can really get our minds wrapped around where we might be, knowing that no one knows the answers to those questions, but I know that some of that was built into the model, and I still don't have like a crystal clear understanding of how all those things interact with the maps and the numbers. And so, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Further down here, I propose a special committee of the whole. It might be useful to invite some of the scientists, Aaron Jacobs and Aaron Hood, or two that, you know, we're relying on heavily to do those risk assessments. And while of course they're not going to give us, this is the percentage risk, they are doing the science and have that information. So it might be a good way to kind of kick off on all things GLOF meeting.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I haven't completely decided what direction I would want to give on how we fund, and so it's a good thing we're not making decisions now. But if we did end up deciding on going with a special tax district, I'm wondering, as information that you can provide, would you be able to give me? I realize that's going to require a special election. Would you be able to give me maybe a realistic timeline of what that would look like as far as calling the special election, securing the funds, and then doing the work that we need to do for phase 2?
Do you have an answer for that now, or that's something that you'd want to come back to us with?
So I think I talk about it a little bit when I talk about service areas later on in the memo. But just so there is that information, but what I'm hearing beyond what's in the memo that Assemblymember Kelly would like is a timeline for that process for a special election. And what I've really been trying to figure out too is, you know, assessed value and mill rate, right? I mean, for example, residential homes, there's 400 million in value in residential land and homes in 18 feet. Okay, is that enough money to contribute to phase? Is that enough if we set it at 1 mil, right? And so those are the types of answers I think that you're going to need to know, like how high would the mill rate have to be for us to get a meaningful contribution towards phase 2, towards maintenance. And so I think that is one piece of like data that you're looking for, and then the timeline piece. So
Yeah, I think that would be valuable. Thank you.
All right, buyouts.
Yes, we have been working with the Natural Resource Conservation Service on a potential buyout program for View Drive property owners. View Drive is just a very challenging little peninsula of land. If you look on that map that we have and you're like, oh yeah, it sticks out into the river and has water on all sides. I think an aerial image really helps show how difficult that is. So there is a buyout program that could be an option, and we have invited the Alaska Brett Nelson to a special we're landing on a October 13th special committee of the whole for this discussion. I believe the clerk pulled members and that people were available then. So hoping that that's when we can, haven't cemented that because there are a couple of other variables as we get the information to you, but we're hoping to nail that date down for this meeting. And we want to have NRCS there to present to you and answer some of these questions because there still are a lot of outstanding questions. One outstanding question is how much the city would have to pay for the project versus the property owners. And so it's a right now 75-25, so 75% federal government, 25% local government. And, we're asking, okay, well, if it's a $25 million project, that might be difficult from, depending on what guidance you guys give me, right? It's like, what's a reasonable amount per household for CBJ taxpayers to support our, friends and neighbors who are affected in the flood zone? It might be difficult. We really need some clarity on that. So I'm hoping to get closer to that when we have NRCS here to present to you. Another question is that we don't have a good answer to is what homes would need to participate in the buyout. There's some configuration of homes that probably absolutely would have to participate if this were to be deemed eligible by the federal government. And so there's a little bit of tension there trying to get guidance. I mean, I think, for example, if the two least affected properties were the only two that wanted to participate, that'd be very different than the four worst affected properties that are in a contiguous area that makes a lot of sense to turn into parkland. Part of the expense that we would have to cover of this program is also turning that, so demolition and turning that into parkland. We don't have to own the parkland forever, so I know that Mr. Shaughnessy's been working with nonprofits. He's been up on the hill trying to figure out, are there other conservation reasons to put this property in conservation, and would we have partners there? And the reality is it's a big ticket for all of those organizations. So we are hoping to get a little bit more guidance from NRCS on the 13th about what that looks like. Everyone who lives there has been very supportive of the conversation. Only two households have been like, yeah, absolutely, we want to pursue that. So again, those are some of the questions. The other question that Mayor Weldon presented was, can we just do HESCO barriers around each individual home? You probably know there was at least one home that was successfully protected by their own HESCO barrier installation project. I don't have a good answer for that, except for many of those properties have soil stability issues. And even when I talked with the three homeowners who did their own project, they were like, yeah, we understand we have had this engineered. So they didn't do that willy-nilly. They had an engineer, they did that very, in a very kind of planned and thoughtful manner, and knew what their soils were that they were putting those HESCO barriers on. So that would be a question, right? The soil stability. There's a question of HESCO barriers having to be so high in some of those areas that there's just not enough room. I mean, it's the same issue of drawing a circle around the whole neighborhood as drawing a circle around individual households. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some individual households that could benefit from a similar strategy. We haven't done that level of analysis, and without direction from the assembly, it was hard to. We can only do so many things, right? So we were very focused on phase one. Anything on View Drive is going to be very expensive, whether it's mediation, whether it's flood mitigation or a buyout program. So I don't think that's that's not an engineering answer to Mayor Weldon's question, but it is kind of putting the things that we do know about View Drove in context as part of that question. And we can certainly bring more information back on that topic.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Manager, you kind of mentioned this. I think you already answered my first question. Do all owners want the buyout? And I heard you say that only two View Drive owners have requested that. What would a buyout look like if only a small percentage of the 18 properties, let's say 4 of them say, yes, absolutely want the buyout, but then the other 14 homes, or the other, maybe it's even half, 9 and 9, 9 people want the buyout, 9 people don't want the buyout and have their home turned into parkland. How do we split that? What happens to the neighborhood if there's not consensus, if there's a buyout or not? How do we determine which homes, or is it the whole neighborhood or not the whole neighborhood? Or is it we can do some of the homes, and if you want to sell your home and we can turn it parkland, and if you want to keep your home, you can. Could you maybe talk about what we would run into as some of those homes weren't impacted this year, and I can't imagine those people jumping at a chance to move out if they weren't hit at this flood, but yet we have homes on the other side of that road. How would we figure out who could do the buyout, who could participate? I've asked you way too long of a question, but I think you understand what I'm asking.
Yeah, so it is voluntary, so the homeowners do need to be willing participants. And the question of like who needs to participate to make it eligible is a question for NRCS, and I sure hope you save that one for them when we have them, because we don't have that guidance.
Excellent, thank you.
Ms. Hughes-Gandy and Mr. Steininger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for this one, I know we need to get more information about all of this, but knowing we have a rough order of magnitude here, so I'm guessing we have, I guess, I saw this earlier, we talked about, would it be assessed like a flood damaged home, or would it get assessed? It doesn't really matter if that's kind of the cost we're looking at here. It would be helpful to me. I think we're going to have to get further in the process, so I'll scrap some of these mentally. If we have some other idea of, we've had slides, like landslides here, where it would be helpful to know where that, whatever that magic number ends up being, where that falls on a continuum, just because that's going to factor into my decision, with comparing these homes to all the other homes in the borough. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think maybe for me, we need to get further along in this process.
Okay, she doesn't want an answer. Mr. Steininger.
The answer to this might be very similar to the answer to Mr. Bryce's question, which is, wait and ask NRCS. But the memo says there's 20 properties, 18 have structures, and the 2 without structures would not be eligible for the buyout at all. Does that mean that, say, all 18 property owners want to go in on this buyout? Do we just have 2 plots kind of randomly in the neighborhood that would continue to be owned by private citizens, but with no possible option for us to ever really permit building a home on those properties? And kind of what is happening with those 2 properties? Are they sufficiently outside of the flood zone that we may conceivably permit building a home on them?
I don't have that answer, but it's a great question.
I'll add one comment that may be in the area that Ms. Hughes-Gandius was going, which is, if as we consider buyouts, thinking about the other areas of town that we have talked about buyouts before, to me, that is primarily Barron's, Ave. And so I think those are very different types of risk. But it would be good to have some understanding of how they compare so that we know what the precedent is that we're setting and how it impacts potential future expectations of assemblies. And that brought one more question I have, which, so I'll use my privilege here. This says NRC, for the NRCS program, it needs to be a city, federal government partnership with the city paying 25%. I know we can have partners, but could it just be, it could be a conservation organization and the federal government, or a parks organization and the federal government. It doesn't have to be the city. It just needs to be someone other than the federal government that pays that 25%. Is that, and I know we'll have a conversation with folks, but am I misinterpreting that?
From what I understand, and again, we need a firm answer from NRCS on this, so it's a good question for them, is it can't be, it also cannot be the property owner, right? So the property owner can't be like, I'll write a check for 25%. Your question on can it be another partner agency, again, I would have to ask them for details. I do think that that is something we could get around through an appropriation or a transfer or, some MOA, even if there was like that type of a rule.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it's not a requirement that we be involved. If anyways, we can find out more, so. All right, go ahead. Mr. Kelly first and then Mr. Steininger.
Thank you. I remember seeing this somewhere in the memo, but I can't remember where. But you also brought this up during your regular update that you send to us, Assembly members weekly. I was wondering if you had any information about a potential midterm solution that you'd be prepared to discuss, or would that be better maybe for a future meeting?
Yeah, I don't have any information about a midterm solution. I will share with the listening public that Army Corps is very motivated to find some relief for Juneau residents before the kind of 7 to 10 year time frame that they talked about at their public meeting. And when General Getz was here, he talked about buying down risk. The HESCO barriers are buying down risk, right? Corps has spent some money, CBJ, state, Clinton and Haida have spent money to buy down risk. Is there a project that we could do in the interim that would further buy down that risk? And the way I like to think about it is we can handle a 14-foot flood or a 15-foot flood. It's not that we want need the flood to go away entirely. It's that we need it to not just keep getting worse. And I don't have an engineering solution to that. Neither does the Army Corps of Engineers. But I can tell you, they are very motivated to get there. Senator Sullivan has been incredibly supportive of that. So again, all I can tell you is that they're working as hard as I have seen a federal agency work on trying to get us some answers and some solutions in the near term.
Thank you.
Mr. Steininger.
Thank you. I may have missed this in the comments, so I apologize if I did. When we engage in the buyout, how do we set the purchase price of the homes? How much individuals be compensated?
So again, NRCS will have more information on that, but from what I understand, it is based on assessed value, and we can make an argument for different, right, we can make an argument that the assessed value is lower because of these things that happen. We can make an argument that it's higher. So there are various arguments to be made in that. It looks like Robert, you could talk if you want.
Allow it.
Thank you, through the chair. We understand that it's based on appraised value, and we either use the appraised value before the federal disaster declaration that we were basing the program off of, so that would be before the 2024 event, or after. Those are kind of the two choices that we have, and it's unclear to us whether we set that or whether NRCS sets that or whether we do that in some combination. But those are the kind of two options that we understand right now.
Manager Kester, anything else? Maybe take us home here. What else do you want to tell us?
Yes, thank you. So I think that just to talk about service areas briefly, understand that a service area is like the roaded service area or the fire service area, and it's your property taxes pays for that. The assembly sets that mill rate every year. And just to recall that 30% of our property taxes are paid for by commercial properties, Kensington, Greens Creek, and ALMP being the top 3 property taxpayers in the borough. There's also some, nuance. We have a 12 mil cap right now, so we can't go, and that includes our service areas. So there may be a scenario where we would need to charge high enough of a mill rate that we would be hitting up against that cap. And of course, if that cap gets lowered to 9, it would likely be unfeasible as a solution. So just to keep that in mind. And then of course, another very different thing about a service area is it's the registered voters, not each property owner. So an LID is like it's really a $1 one vote, and the service area is one man or woman, one vote. So those are two very important distinctions just to keep thinking about when you work on that. And then the additional considerations, I think we already talked about staffing, and at the Lands Committee today, we talked about permitting challenges, just wanting you to know, that's on our radar, permitting challenges. And again, we've enlisted help of our delegation on that. So that probably concludes. I think I got plenty of homework to keep us all busy, but happy to get more comments to make your next conversation useful.
Any other questions or information needs you all will need to make these very challenging decisions? None. I will say just quickly that Ms. Kester and I talked a little bit today about just how complicated this set of decisions will be, and so might try to design something to make sure we, establish principles or a process to not just kind of take these one at a time, but get closer to unified decision-making. Mayor Weldon.
I was seeing if Ms. Kester was going to go over her additional considerations or if we're done giving her stuff for tonight, because I have one thing to add.
Go ahead, Mayor Weldon.
I know we talked a bit about the funding, but I think it's probably ripe right now that I would move to direct staff to bring us an appropriating ordinance to redirect the $5 million matching funds for the Capitol Civic Center for flood mitigation. And I would put it at $1 million for maintenance and $4 million for phase 2. Although my plan is to work with my finance chair and my lands chair on making sure that's the best way with staff. And if anybody else has ideas, they could get hold of staff. So, and if I may speak to my motion.
Go ahead.
So as everybody knows, I'm a big fan of this project. So I'm not withdrawing my support by any stretch of the imagination, but a flood is immediate need. And we're talking big numbers and we need the money. So we've agreed to match any federal funding with the 5 million trying to get federal funding for the Civic Center. So I think that the Civic Center could still say the assembly is behind us, but at this time, I think the money could be better spent on flood mitigation. So hence my motion.
Any objections? Seeing none, that is so moved.
Thank you for the time, as Mr. Bryson would say.
Anything else on this topic? All right, that brings us to ordinance 2025-39 about the purchase of 2 floors of the Burns Building. Manager Kester.
Thank you. So I want to start this conversation by just acknowledging that purchasing 2 floors of a box outside of the downtown core is not my dream situation. It's not my legacy. It's not anything like that. So I know that there's a lot of concern about a lot of things, and they're outlined in this memo. A lot of the cons are. I just think that it's a very practical, fiscally responsible thing to do. And so that is really where I'm coming from on this. So, you know, and you all have other things to take into consideration than, you know, my job to provide, you know, quality office space for CBJ employees. I know that you care about that too. My point is just you have a lot of other things to consider. I have a timeline here, and I'm not going to go over the timeline because you all can read, and you also all have, most of you have the lived experience of this timeline. But I thought it was important just to go through all the moments that you touched on this topic. So these are moments that you touched on it after New City Hall was not moving forward. And you did look at, well, let's just lease different space. Like we hired Richter Real Estate to do an analysis of a commercially available lease space. We did an RFI for a lease space. And through those decisions, you were like, no, the Burns Building is the best option. When we got the schools, you were like, well, maybe we should convert a school. That seems to make a lot of sense. It's a big building. And so you looked at what it would cost to convert a school. You looked at, you know, the pros and cons of converting a school. We looked at the old dairy building and decided that's great office space. And right now we have probably 24 city employees working out of there, and that will be part of our long-term solution. So you did look at those options, and we did at some point pivot from just leasing the space to owning the space as that opportunity became available. So what started as a lease conversation eventually evolved into a purchase conversation. So just to kind of remember how we got to where we are. And then I want to just let you reiterate exactly where we are now in negotiations. And so where we are right now is that we would pay $9.3 million, which is appraised value, for the 2 floors of the Burns Building and associated parking, and put $2.7 million into a sinking fund that would pay for future capital projects. So that would be, 2/3 of that would be credit for future capital projects. I really think it's easier to think about it like we're paying $10.2 million, because we're paying the first third on behalf of the Permanent Fund Corporation for this capital replacement fund. So it's just easier to think about it as a $10.2 million purchase. And that's kind of the value that we have used as we work through this memo. Of course, you still have to write a check for $12 million, so that's very real. But from a value perspective, that's one way to look at it. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about our office space currently. This building, is fine. I'm not glad summer's over, but it was like 83 degrees by the end of the day in my office this past week. So whatever, heating and cooling is not something, you all know this because you sit here in this building and wear layers, but Marine View really has just exponential challenges. I think we had 5 active leaks when I wrote this memo. We've got a couple more since then, including toilets, just water exploding out of toilets on Friday. There's a wall that's rotten through kind of because of a pinhole leak in the wall. It's just old plumbing that needs to be totally replaced. And so there's just a lot of challenges. The building is actively being sold. In fact, I think maybe even closed this week. So there will be a new property owner there. We do have a lease to believe we have an 18-month lease. So, but we do need to start thinking about moving real quickly, because the friendliness of our property, of our landlord, as we've talked more and more about the leaks and the state of the building is their patience is probably waning with us, I would say. So that's just our current office space. I have a pro and con list here that, again, I'm not going to go through, but you you've all, made many of these arguments, so it was just a way to put the pen on the paper and remind ourselves of that. What does bear talking about a little bit is the cost of renovation, because that number is higher than the last time I talked about this, or the many times that I have talked about it. So if you recall, before the budget process, when the manager's budget included money for renovation, we had about a three-something million dollar cost for a carpet paint renovation, moving really. The furniture is going to be expensive. The cubicle walls are expensive. I think we budgeted that at like 7,000 an employee, and when you have 160 employees, that actually adds up to quite a large number. I asked Engineering and Public Works to take another look at this, because knowing that this conversation was going to happen. And we do have a new chief architect who has recent experience in doing these types of remodels. So they were able to really lean on more actual costs. Costs have gone up. They also made sure that this cost estimate includes the cost of actually moving, right? So there's going to be costs associated with labor and lots of things to actually move. And so the kind of full interior remodel is at $7.6 million. That's the reverse floor plan, that's carpet and paint, and all of the things in that summary of work, which is $2.5 million more than the last time we talked about it. So I think it was a hard number, certainly for me to swallow. We need about the same amount just to do a partial interior remodel. I don't think option one, status quo, is viable, because we have to have cubicles and things like that. I mean, could we move old furniture? Yeah, some of it really isn't worth moving. So anyway, but we did outline all those options. So you will see in my recommendations, one of my asks for you tonight is to direct staff to proceed with design for the full interior remodel, knowing that that's a big number, and then I would be able to bring to you, what that, I'd be able to bring to you a more refined number. B, you'd be able to be like, move really the walls and reversing the floor plan isn't worth that, but you got to do carpet and paint and cubicles, and you got to do something about this bathroom. Or, you'll be able to not quite a la carte the renovation, but you'll have a lot more information. I also would invite any of you, and we're happy to arrange this. It's been a while since we did tours of the facility, but it's always good for you to get your eyes on it and be like, oh yeah, we probably should, move this wall, and oh yeah, that carpet definitely needs to be replaced, or not. Or you could look at it and be like, this is so much better than City Hall. Why would we change anything? So I am offering to do that. We did try to do run some numbers, mostly because we knew Neil needed numbers. No, you all need numbers. I'm going to put so you have a status quo to 2045, and then you have a purchasing the Burns building to 2045 analysis in here. And I think it's hard to put too much weight on the exact dollar numbers, because, for example, the Marine View lease, we will need to move those employees somewhere else, and that will inevitably be much more expensive. But it's good to have those numbers and to look at what we're paying in operating costs, and just to have a reference point from a dollars and cents perspective. So with all of its you see all the asterisks and all the qualifications, we did run those numbers, and of course, owning your own facility does save money over time. Also, the condo association dues in this structure, they cover lots of things, including ongoing and deferred maintenance. So the idea is we will be putting money away every year in addition to the sinking fund that then will be able to proactively take care of things. So that's a expenditure that's difficult to quantify in how we normally take care of our facilities. And so that makes me want to back up to the capital cost number that we used for New City Hall. So I pulled that number because it's a really difficult number to be like, how much money would we have to invest in New City Hall if we were to stay here? Well, we had all kinds of numbers for you in our New City Hall campaign. All I did, because it's a public document that we did engineering work for, is I went to the New City Hall economic analysis, and I pulled the number that says what are the immediate needs that we need to do to City Hall. Exterior repair package, interior finish, LED lighting, roof replacement, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades. And that total is the 8-point-some million dollars. So it doesn't include, foundation issues, doesn't include renovating, space configuration. It doesn't include a lot of those costs, but I just wanted to let you know that's where I pulled that number from, because I think it, to a certain extent, if you appropriate funds, we will tell you what we can do within that number. So anyway, that is where you get the, and that won't buy us to 2045. So that's why this is a little bit hard to use as a comparison number. So all of that brings me to the last page, which talks about the amount of money that you would need to appropriate for each one of the options. You have $14.6 million right now in the City Hall. There's 2 City Hall CIPs, so the combination of those 2 CIPs. At a $12 million purchase price, if we only moved, we could save some money. If we just did paint and carpet, we need $1.5 million, and if we did a full remodel, we need just over $5 million. And I wanted to highlight and keep in mind that we do have this building, and we don't know what that would pull from sealed competitive bid. We value it at $3.8 million for insurance purposes. And I do talk about the Archipelago lot for sale for $9 million waterfront acreage. It is 0.77 acres. I missed that in the memo. So I can't tell you that this lot has anything, I'm not an appraiser, but it's just good for a frame of reference to think, okay, that lot's for sale for $9 million. It's about 3 times the size of this lot. I do think that a prospective buyer would likely tear down this facility. So you have listened to me a lot this evening. I will stop.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was with Public Works and Facilities during a large part of the discussion of how to move forward with a City Hall. And I wanted to point out there was a survey done as we began this process, what the community wanted to see from their City Hall. And the number one answer, above and beyond all, and I believe Manager Kester can confirm this, is that the community wanted a long service life from whatever we did. Ma'am, is that your information too? That was the number one thing they did. You guys have heard me talk about, we're on Plan D, Plan E, trying to come up with a plan for City Hall. This plan satisfies that for the longest amount of service life that we could possibly get out of a building. All other plans had shorter service lives than the action that we're going down here. And so I didn't know if there was any other helpful information on that survey, but as you're digging into this, we asked the community, what do you want to see from it? And this plan still moves along with what the community answered in the survey. Thank you for allowing me that time.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Before I issue any comments, I did have some questions. I appreciate that you gave us 3 options as far as the remodels. I am wondering about option 2. Would it be adequate both to conduct city business and for the assembly to conduct its business? Like, would we have to do any sound system remodels that wouldn't be included in that, or would we be able to? Would it be adequate for both the assemblies and city staff's needs?
I think that's a difficult question to answer without additional design work. I also think it's a subjective question. I mean, we're here, we're making it work in this room that has poor sound, and so it certainly would be an improvement.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do we have an indication of what the reversed layout costs?
So I know that there's 1,000 linear feet, I believe, of partitions, which is architecture speak for non-load bearing walls in this cost estimate. What I don't know is the details of how much that buys us in office space versus cubicle space, primarily because we do need to do a much more detailed space needs analysis. Who deserves their own office? Who has to have their own office for confidentiality reasons? We've done blocking, so what we've done is we've taken the space needs on a like per employee basis and assign different values to different, you know, supervisor, director, et cetera. And we've blocked out all that space to make sure that like there was enough space for like generally speaking and city employees to fit. But we haven't done the detailed design work of like who goes where and what does that look like and what does that cost.
Other questions? Mayor Weldon, do you want to?
I have a question.
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry, I
thought you
didn't
saw
see
my
it.
hand.
Nope. Miss Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I was coming off you, right when you said. My question is about option one, because I believe you said that was quite ragtaggedy. And that might have been coupled with the invitation to see for ourselves. So just looking at the deappropriation option, could you speak to that a little bit more, just so I make sure I understand what that is versus other things we've looked at?
Yeah, so as I understand this, this really is just the cost of moving. There would be minor construction and modifications needed. We're obviously going to need IT. We're going to need to run cables. We're going to need, you know, outlets and services in new areas. But this wouldn't be new carpet, wouldn't be new paint, wouldn't be new furniture, and I think some of our furniture is fine, but I mean, even I have hand-me-down furniture. Well, I have nice hand-me-down furniture, but you know, it's quite a mix. So I think that's why I have a little less than 1 million in deappropriation, because I do think if you were to choose option one, I would need to be like, okay, bare minimum, we need some cubicle walls because we're all going to be in the space together, and you know, we could put some work to like a bare minimum cost estimate that's a little more fleshed out than this.
Okay, thank you. So within that, you still think you could get those cubicle walls, or no? So then that's where you're losing me, because I'm not following. Yes, you can do it with this. It's not great. The furniture is not great, but bare minimum to me means we can't do it without that. So that is not represented anywhere. And if it's not, that's fine. But could you take another crack? I don't understand that we bare minimum need cubicle walls. So is that option two and higher, or?
It would be higher than option one. Frankly, I didn't want to spend a lot of design money or effort on an option that I didn't think the assembly would recommend, but I certainly am happy to do that work if you'd like us to really sharpen our pencils with the spend as little money as possible option.
Okay, thank you. I got you now. Thanks.
We have two recommendations here. Mayor Weldon, do you want to kick us off with the first motion? If that's okay.
Certainly. I move ordinance 2025-39 to the assembly.
Objections? I see Miss Atkinson. Any other comments? Miss Hall.
I think I will object as well and speak to my objection. I feel like if we're going to go down, move into the Burns building, that we really need to one time do whatever it needs to make it a serviceable, workable area. I think when Deed moved out back in 2023, they were at that time recommending new carpet and paint. And so I think option three has carpet, but option two is, I think if we're going to do the job, we should do it right. And so
Ms. Hall, just for clarity, we're talking about two different topics in this conversation, so I realize we just jumped a bit. But the first motion from the mayor is just to move forward with the Burns building. And then we will, after that, talk about where we're going in terms of design.
My apologies. I thought the first motion was.
No worries, I bounced us around there. Okay, so we have a motion, we have an objection. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll object just for a quick comment. Just to say that in my own time here, this is not, I hate this option, and I think hate might be too strong a word, but also this is where we've gotten, and I think if I wasn't on the assembly the whole time, then I'd probably say, let's go revisit this. There's got to be a better option. But I've been here while we did it, and the reality is, unless the assembly wants to put the money into this building and some of those other buildings, but we've never had that conversation of let's put back together this building, which has lots of problems with it, and some of these other rental spaces, and commit to being mixed around the city. So, the closer we've gotten to making a decision, and I know that we'll go all the way to the assembly before we make a decision, but at this point, it's with a sense of resignation. But I'm not going to object tonight because I feel like I've been here through the whole process, and hindsight being 2020, I wish we didn't put it out to the ballot 2 years in a row. Who knows? I think that would be better for the community had we gotten to a purpose-built facility. I think it makes a lot more sense. I would prefer to see it more in the downtown core than this building is. But it's with all those reservations, I do know the situation is untenable for some of our employees who are in rental buildings, and that's just bad luck to be a city employee and be in the crappy building versus the city employee who's in a different building. So for all those reasons, I'm not going to object, and I share some people's sense of this isn't what I wanted, but we do owe it to our community and to the folks who work for the city, for the community to come up with a solution.
Any other comments? There was one objection. Go ahead, Mr. Bryson.
If objection is going to be maintained, I want to talk about this or advocate for this, because we've talked about this for years. We're year 4, year 5 into trying to solve the City Hall problem. We've gone down option A, option B, option C. We did surveys. We brought it to the public twice. Wanting the purpose-built building, absolutely, that would have been probably the best bang for the buck over the long-term period. We didn't get to go that way. I think Ms. Hall was touching on it. So our next best choice, get a building that's going to last for a very long time and do a proper remodel in it. So that way we're getting things done right from the start. So we don't have to go in 5 years and do a massive renovation, or 10 years. No other city that we found as we were doing research spreads out their operations like this. This is an incredibly poor way to do it. And if you noticed that if we stay as is, we're paying $43 million over the next 20 years. We're doing City Hall the worst operations that we can be doing it because of the logistical layout that we have, and paying rent in buildings that should be used for apartments. So I strongly would advise for us to go with this, get this to the people so we can put this issue to bed and move on to the other important things that we need to do. Thank you for allowing me that time.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you all also speak in support of this. I was going door to door the second time that this was on the ballot, because I was also on the ballot at that time. And one of the concerns that I believe we've addressed here is that we didn't take care of this building, and that that the reason why we needed to move, well, part of it was, I guess one of people's objections to the new city hall was that we didn't maintain this building. What I like about this is that we do have a maintenance plan in the form of our condo dues in here. I like that we are consolidating most city employees into offices. I've heard that we have IT all the way out at Auk Bay, other city services spread all around. I think that's both inefficient for city government, and I think it also makes it difficult for our citizens trying to access the services that they need. So I think overall, this move makes city government more efficient, and it also satisfies one of the requests that the people have over our city facilities and over our city hall.
All right, I'm gonna call the question since all we're doing is sending this to the assembly. Ms. Hendricks, we have a motion, we have an objection. Will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Mayor,
Yes.
Ms. Adkisson,
No.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Steininger,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion passes with, apologies, 6 yeas and 2 nays.
Thank you. That brings us to the second recommendation here at the bottom of our page. Because Ms. Hall already showed us her cards, Ms. Hall, would you make a motion for us?
Absolutely, and thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we direct the city manager to begin design on option 3 and bring more detailed cost estimates and plans to a future CAL. And ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a tough one. There's not a lot done here. I already showed my cards and said I hate this option. I think I'm more in the comfort range of option 2. I haven't been in the Burns building for a bit. I'm happy. I would actually I'll follow up with the manager to go give it another glance. I worked in the Burns building before education moved out of there. So I am somewhat up to date on the state of the carpet and the paint and everything. And it's, like many buildings in Juneau for kind of a line worker, a bit shabby, but also I've worked in a lot of shabby buildings all over the city. So I definitely want to give the management what they need, the bare minimum, to get the number of offices that they'll need. I understand that might cost some money. I'd be interested in keeping that as low within a reasonable amount. So I do confess I would like to keep it as low as possible, but not so low that it's, not lower than they need. So something more in the vicinity of 1.5 million is my comfort zone. Just in light of where we are right now financially, politically, the various needs. So I object.
All right, I have Mayor Weldon, Mr. Steininger, and then Ms. Atkinson. Go ahead, Mayor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I object for purposes of an amendment. And my amendment would be bring more detailed cost estimates and plans for both reversed and non-reversed layouts to a future CAL.
Maybe you can provide a little bit more clarity on, is that option 3 with more detail, or is that?
Yes, option 3, I'm just showing you where in the recommendation I'm at. So the whole sentence would say, direct city manager to begin design on option 3 and bring more detailed cost estimates and plans for both a reversed and non-reversed layout to a future CAL.
Okay, Mr. Steininger,
I just made an amendment. We need to take care of that. See if there's
Yeah,
any.
that was, yes. Mr. Steininger, do you have an objection to the amendment?
objection for probably the purpose of the question. On the reversed versus non-reversed, and maybe this is my incorrect thinking as I've been thinking about options 1, 2, and 3. In my mind, option 2 was keeping the existing, non-reversed layout, but doing all those things that need to be done and are easier to do when nobody's in there, like ripping out the carpet, painting the walls, so on and so forth. So if I understand your amendment correctly, would it be correct to interpret it as asking staff to come back with more detailed cost estimates on option 2 and 3, in the sense of 2 being non-reversed, 3 being reversed?
Yes, you probably said it better than I did.
No objection.
All right, so we have an amendment that would alter this to bring designs for both option 2 and option 3. Any objections to that amendment? Seeing none, that amendment is so moved, which brings us back to the original motion. I know we had some objections, so maybe things have changed, so maybe you can re-raise your hand if you have a new objection. Ms. Atkinson.
I guess maybe we haven't had objections, so maybe I should just wait and see if there's any actual objection. I just had a comment.
Any objections to this motion? Okay, so seeing none, that is so moved. Nice job, everybody. I am going to give us a break here. We'll take a 7-minute break and then we'll come to our last agenda topic. Just a reminder that we have an executive session at the end of this meeting. I said last agenda item, and I only partially meant it. Okay, that brings us to Seawalk and big picture marine passenger fees, capital project planning. Ms. Pierce, is this you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That is me. So this agenda topic is informational at this point. We don't have hard numbers or hard requests, but there is a lot going on the waterfront right now in terms of capital projects that could take place in kind of the short to midterm. And we felt like it was important to provide the Assembly with an update on where those different projects are at and some of the options that we may have. So some of the, you mentioned marine passenger fees in the intro to this. I do want to reiterate that when we're talking about debt financing, we're talking about some form of revenue bond or debt financing with marine passenger fees or potentially dockage fees. We're not talking about general obligation bonds. And the projects mentioned tonight, likely there is some sort of debt financing required if we're going to do all or some of them. So with that, and in an effort to provide some context to later decisions, I'll start with the Franklin to AJ alignment, which we've talked about quite a bit recently with the Petro Marine lease. There are three, the challenge with constructing Seawalk projects. The Seawalk is a priority under the long-range waterfront plan, something that has for a long time had Assembly community support up through and including from the Visitor Industry Task Force. Challenges with Seawalk projects for many years since we started working on the Seawalk have always been private land ownership along the waterfront, and either being granted easements from those owners or coming up with creative solutions. So we were able to find a creative solution on the Franklin to AJ alignment. That's moving forward. We're working with the owners of the Franklin dock right now to clean up some easement issues that will facilitate the land swap that has come before the Assembly before. Likely the AJ dock is a very small parcel that will require either just direct purchase at appraised value or something similar. So the last estimate that we got for this work was about $20 million. We do not yet have a new estimate. I was hoping to have one for tonight. But there have been some design changes since we got that $20 million estimate. So recognizing that there's $7.4 million in the Seawalk CIP right now, staff will likely be coming back to the Assembly for some decisions in the relatively near future related to the Franklin to AJ project. Moving along the water, and also to add a little bit of context, we're hoping to be under construction on that project in 2027. We do have some benefit of coordination with mobilizing at the same time as Petro for certain projects, especially the parts that tie in. So we're everybody's keen to move as quickly as possible on those components of the project. So moving along the waterfront to the Auk Landing to Gold Creek alignment. This is new. We talked quite a bit about the Seawalk in negotiations with Huna Totem. Mayor Weldon had some amendments to the lease that included the Seawalk. The idea in those discussions was that we would connect the seawalk to where the seawalk kind of ends at Gold Creek. We have not started design on that project, but I think staff feels that right now is probably a good time to engage our engineers and start that work, given that there's major development going on with some efficiencies with Auk Landing, also with the Coast Guard. As I've mentioned in my memo, there's a platted right-of-way in front of the Coast Guard facility that may be an option to go inland on the seawalk to kind of mitigate safety concerns around the Coast Guard facility. And then moving towards Marine Park, there are still some private land issues to sort out, but this creates some positive momentum in that direction. And this is long lead time, but I think it's important to keep it in the overall context and also recognize that design for this project, unless there is a major objection to us pursuing that, is part of the overall context and part of the overall cost of these projects that we are looking at. Additionally, in prepping for today, I was talking to Mr. Sill with Docks and Harbors, and he provided some additional seawalk context about a project that wasn't entirely on my radar. So this year in the marine passenger fee budget, we funded a condition assessment for the seawalk around the Alaska Steamship Dock, so near the parking garage. I was aware that we funded the condition assessment. I don't think I had fully contextualized that could lead to quite an expensive project of replacing old infrastructure. So once that project is complete, it's kicking off in the fall most likely, we'll come back to the assembly with an update on that. And then finally, we also have another large waterfront CIP, and that CIP is for shore power, and that has $13,309,000 in it. So we have been, our hope with shore power for many years, since I've worked at CBJ, has been to find federal funding or some sort of external funding. And federal funding is not the only option. We've been pursuing some avenues with potential state funding. There is a possibility that we could sign a long-term agreement with a cruise line partner on our docks, and Seattle funded their seawalk, or their shore power that way. So certainly other external funding options. However, the need for a federal match of the magnitude that we were considering may not be as relevant. There may be a desire in the future to shift things around to fund portions of the seawalk and then kind of backfill that with marine passenger fees. But to give an update on where we're at in the shore power project, AEL&P and to back up for a second, we entered into an MOA with AEL&P, where AEL&P is leading the design for that project. That's logical. They're the utility. They would ultimately have to operate the project that's designed. So they have issued a contract to H3 and PND for 35% design. If we're able to get that project through design, obviously a shovel-ready project is more attractive to funders. And I would recommend that we at least continue through design. Another kind of critical piece in constructing shore power that commits us a little more is the ordering of a transformer. Those are long lead time items. The one we purchased for the Franklin dock, which was just installed, cost $3 million and had a lead time of 28 months. So, not insignificant. So, and there have been, to bring Huna Totem into the shore power conversation. There have been some initial discussions between Huna Totem, CBJ, Docks and Harbors, and AEL&P about kind of who's on first and how shore power projects might work. I think we'll know more as we progress through design a little bit further on our project. All that to say, as I mentioned, largely informational, but as all these projects progress, we'll come back with funding questions and options. So I wanted the Assembly to be aware of what's going on, all the moving pieces and parts. I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions and state any fervently held opinions about any of this. As Director Flick told me, she's advised that we will figure out how much we need and when, and then finance will generate some options for us in terms of what funding packages might look like, and strategic ways to move some of this money around. But you're recognizing that we're talking about some pretty big ticket projects here, funded with marine passenger fees. I want to reiterate that funding source like a fourth time. And that we'll need to have a discussion as we get to more critical decision points about prioritization. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from the Assembly? Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question about the Seawalk, or sorry, I keep doing that all day today, about the shore power CIP and the transformer, because that had been on my mind before I got all the way through the memo to ask you, hey, whatever happened with that? So I see that we got that. In terms of design, as we move through this project, are there things like that without a doubt, you're gonna need a Duracell C battery and no matter which way the design goes? Or is it's such a complex topic that maybe you need this kind of transformer, not that kind of transformer? Because it would be nice with these giant lead items, and because of tariffs, if we could, sock away, like, we have this much and we're also gonna buy a transformer. So could you speak to that a little?
Absolutely. Great question. Through the chair, it's more the latter. I don't think it's like every transformer is entirely custom, but I do think that there are decisions that need to be made after we've progressed through the design process a little bit more than where we're at today.
Other questions? This might be a question for Ms. Flick, and I'm a bit ignorant here in that I don't think that I can remember kind of moved forward on any new revenue bonds since I've been on the Assembly. Could be wrong about that. But is that what we're talking about here? I'm curious about are those applicable tools for both Seawalk and shore power? I believe we talked about using that for shore power in the past. That makes sense because they're charging for power. Can we also use revenue bonds for Seawalk? And is that what we're referencing when we're talking about debt here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, it would be based on passenger fees or dockage fees as the source of revenue. I believe, and I don't want to get further out on a limb beyond where I'm comfortable, and I would ask Ms. Flick to step in, but she did say that there were various funding vehicles, and we could have a more nuanced discussion about that when we're ready.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I see for the shore power one, we have that 55 million upper number. For the Seawalk, I know that will depend on how we break that up. Maybe I just wait until you bring back to us which segment you're gonna do, but just to sort of prepare me, what kind of rough order of magnitude are we talking for one of these segments?
Thank you, through the chair. The estimate that we had several months ago for Franklin to AJ was about 20 million. I don't have a sense of how much more or less complicated the other alignment would be. I believe it's shorter. And as for the project that Docks and Harbors will be scoping with their condition assessment, I wouldn't even begin to speculate.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it looks like we have no other questions. Thank you, Ms. Pierce, for being here.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to staff reports. Any staff reports? Next, we have an executive session, though Ms. Hendricks asked me to get some feedback, so maybe we'll do that before we go into executive session. If that makes sense. Sorry, I didn't really think about. Sure, I'm gonna do it now. We are currently scheduled September 22nd to have our photo done, and I believe we were going to, that assembly meeting and that human resource committee meeting will be at Centennial Hall, and there was a request to do our photo here, but that would involve us moving from here to there. So just wanted to see, well, I want to first ask staff, is that logistically possible? And see what the body thinks about whether they care whether the photo's here or there. Ms. Hendricks, do you feel like we can do all of those things?
Yes, we're currently scheduled for 4 o'clock at Centennial Hall, but we can change if needed.
You feel comfortable if we took photos here at 4 and we're at Centennial Hall by 5 to start our Human Resource Committee meeting?
Yes.
People okay with that plan? Probably means prompt at 4, so we can do that quickly. Okay. Okay, that brings us to executive session. Mr. Bryson, would you make us a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move that the Assembly move into executive discussion to discuss pending CBJ litigation, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Do I have to ask if any members of the public want to object? Seeing none, that's so moved. We are in executive session. Are we doing that here? Okay. Great. So we'll have to ask folks in the audience to vacate the room.
And for members online, we will not be returning to this Zoom link.